This one's been in the background for a month or so, but is now apparently available. A genuinely camera-centric Android phone. It had better be good. Oh, the Kodak Ektra's star feature is a 21 megapixel f/2.0, 1/2.3 inch sensor camera. In fact, the same sensor as in the old Xperia Z3 a few years ago. You do get OIS and phase detection autofocus thrown in, but come on, we're almost into 2017 now, and every flagship phone can match or exceed these capabilities. Where's the Xenon Flash? Haha. Oh well, the phone part is a standard 5-inch 1080p display, 3GB of RAM and a Helio X20 chipset. At £450, this is nothing to write home about, but hey, I'll try and get one in anyway. The design looks interesting, at least. The Swift 2 Plus series is one of the new 2016 breed of aluminium-bodied, fingerprint sensor-equipped budget smartphones. Except that rather than importing this from China a la Xiaomi, you saw the Redmi Note 4 in Phone Show 293, here you're buying from a British company with support based in Glasgow, and so on, i.e. not on the other side of the world. And you get guaranteed updates here thanks to the out-of-the-box use of Cyanogen OS, effectively a regularly updated Android 6 with a few UI bells and whistles on top. All for £149 here on Amazon at the moment. Even at full RRP, it's only £189. There's also a Swift 2 base model with half the capacity, 1 less gig of RAM, and a downgraded camera as well, for £30 less again. I covered last year's Wileyfox devices in Phone Show 266, in case you want to look them up. Being able to get a really decent smartphone down to not far off £100 is just amazing if your partner or maybe your teenager needs a decent Android smartphone, but you really don't want to risk them walking around with a £700 flagship. It's a really good option. But it's the really impressive Swift 2 Plus here that I'm concentrating. It's brand new and perfectly timed for Christmas. So what do you exactly get for £150 plus? As with the other Wileyfox devices, you get a pretty well balanced set of specs across the board. Everything you might need without going over the top in terms of component cost at any point. Yet the finished result here looks and feels premium, and using 99% of apps and games, let's face it, there's very little difference here from the flagship phones at up to 4 times the price. Wow. Okay, 720p resolution for the screen sounds too low, but it's the full RGB striped IPS LCD, and this is absolutely fine on a 5-inch display. And with the advantage that there are less pixels to push around, making the UI fast even on the Snapdragon 430 chipset here, and making the 2700 mAh battery last longer into a second day, if you're careful. 3GB of RAM is very generous for a budget smartphone for a super smooth multitasking experience. Plus, Cyanogen OS is very efficient in terms of RAM use. Most of the time, with my typical applications open, as here, they're all open in the background, I had well over a gigabyte free. Here, 1.5 gigabytes free, amazing. So plenty of overhead for a few meaty videos, web pages or games without dumping everything else in RAM to make room for them, as you often find on 1GB or 2GB RAM devices. On the storage side, there's a whopping 32 gigabytes of internal space, of which 22 gigabytes is free out of the box, plus micro SD, so no worries, whatever your storage needs. The card slot can double as a second SIM slot, that nano size, which is fair enough, though last year's Swift had the 2 SIM slots plus micro SD. Should that be important to you? The fingerprint sensor is a new addition to the budget Wileyfox range, and it's very welcome since there's also NFC, meaning that Android Pay is now firmly a go in the budget sector. Android Pay is even pre-installed by Wileyfox, one of the very few applications put on top of the core Android app set. The other additions are Audio FX, a system-level equalizer, of which more in a moment, the rather excellent Cyanogen File Manager, an FM radio tuner utility, the Cyanogen Gallery app, pretty pointless actually since Google Photos is also here, and Cyanogen Screencast, which lets you record screen activity with commentary. Nothing offensive here though, and nothing always chugging away a la Samsung services on their Android phones. You also get Cyanogen's genuinely useful UI additions and tweaks, including full theme support here with backgrounds, panels and icons, and access to a huge Cyanogen theme store with both free and commercial downloads. Staying with other genuine pros, the camera is really rather excellent on the Swift 2 Plus. It's a 16 megapixel f/1.9 Samsung ISOCELL affair with phase detection autofocus. And you know what? It's only one notch below the best in the world. Just take a look at some of these examples. Again, remember, we're talking about a camera in a phone that's significantly below £200 all in. In low light, it's fine with the usual moving subject caveats, and even in the dead of night, it at least replicates what my eyes could see, he said charitably. Video capture is at 1080p, and unsurprisingly, there's no stabilization at this price. A very good 8 megapixel front camera rounds off the imaging side of things with very little to complain about. The headphone jack audio, yes, it's got one, is surprisingly good. A big improvement on the original Swift and right up there with phones 3 times the price. Wileyfox don't mention this aspect on their website. Maybe it comes along with the Snapdragon 430. Down at the bottom is a USB-C charging point with Quick Charge 3.0 compatibility. Very impressive at this price point, I have to say, though do note you only get a USB-A to C cable in the box. So it's up to you to source your own Quick Charge 3 compatible mains charger. This is understandable at the price point, I think. The mono speaker at the bottom right, the left port, is a cosmetic dummy here. The speaker's hyped up on the website as producing, and I quote, 90 decibels. Wow, let's test it. I wouldn't call this 90 decibels. It's not terrible in terms of fidelity or volume, but it's also not worth shouting about. No pun intended. I did test the level with the sound meter. It's more like 60 decibels. That's 30 decibels difference, which is 3 orders of magnitude. I've asked Wileyfox why there's such a difference, and I'm waiting for their comments back. I can only think that someone got carried away in their marketing department, or maybe there's a software driver issue to fix. Anyway, don't get your hopes up on the speaker side of things. So we're starting a slight downwards curve then after all the positives. Next up is that there's no 5 GHz Wi-Fi support. The chipset supports it, but I don't think Wileyfox paid for the necessary 5 GHz modem circuits and licenses. Again, I've asked them to comment. I assume this was just another compromise in getting down to this price point. It's not a showstopper. 2.4 GHz Wi-Fi is absolutely fine. It's a first world annoyance. Everything else in my house now is using the faster and more reliable 5 GHz band. So why should this be the odd one out? If I'm being really, really picky, I noticed that you only get full resolution in the camera when shooting in 4:3 aspect ratio. For some unaccountable reason, the highest resolution at 16:9 is 8 megapixels, far below what I'd expect for a 16:9 crop of the full 16 megapixel sensor. Again, a prime candidate for a software update, methinks. Now, put together some of my concerns that updates are needed, with the usual need for Android security patches and the presence here of Cyanogen OS, and you'd think I needn't worry, since the latter has traditionally been great about software patches and updates. However, that reputation is for Cyanogen Mod, the open source project that Cyanogen OS grew out of, and the latter is down to Cyanogen Inc. You can see why the situation is a bit confusing, and Cyanogen Inc. has recently announced huge cutbacks in manpower and resources. In other words, we have absolutely no idea whatsoever how Wileyfox is going to ensure feature and security updates in 2017. In theory, there should be no problem with Cyanogen Inc. still putting together update firmwares. In practice, well, we just don't know yet. But let's stay optimistic and assume that all will be well in the end. The review handset had the November 2016 Android security patches, which is at least better than 99.9% of all other Android handsets in the world. So what else? Well, final nice touches on the Swift 2 Plus include support for ambient display with notifications pulsing on the screen as they come in. You don't often get that at budget price points. There's a proper multicolour notification LED at the top, and there's also textured metal control buttons. And this also comes in rose or gold if you don't fancy midnight black. Put it all together, and aside from the cloud hanging over Cyanogen Inc. and the software bundle's future, the Swift 2 Plus is a cracking little smartphone, perfectly proportioned, beautifully built, decently spec'd for the price point, and so on. And you're effectively buying British rather than gambling on a Chinese brand. There's also the Honor 5X, by the way, with similar price and spec and sold in Europe. But the 5X is an altogether bigger and less pocketable and manageable phone. So never mind the cutthroat smartphone market of 2017, never mind Cyanogen's woes. I love this little beauty, and I'm rooting for the Fox going forwards. This is the Wileyfox Swift 2 Plus.